Do you know someone whose Christmas tree is still in the box? Or whose presents are unwrapped? Or maybe still on the store shelves? Maybe that someone is you. Whether you've had your gifts wrapped for months or you're just now beginning, I think that there's something that we can all learn from those who just don't seem to have it all together yet on the outside. Those whose houses aren't decorated, those who are maybe behind by cultural standards in terms of the Christmas season. That is what we are going to dig into today. How being different, how going against the norm is something that we can all learn from. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Persistence in Prayer podcast hosted by Catholic mindset coach, wife, mother, educator, and speaker, Kylie Hine. Kylie is passionate about helping you deepen your relationship with God through the power of prayer. This podcast is a space for high achievers who want to do it all, but also want to prioritize their spiritual life and grow in faith. Join us as we explore the beauty of persistence in prayer and the transformative impact it can have on our lives. Get ready to discover practical tips, insights, and inspiration to help you develop a daily prayer practice and cultivate a deeper sense of trust in God's plan for your life. Let's journey together towards a more fulfilled and faithful life as we invite the Holy Spirit in. Let's begin. The other day in a Facebook group, I read a post from a mom who has 2 toddlers at home and her husband is traveling for work. And she was just feeling really down on herself about not having her Christmas tree up. And I had to giggle because I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. And my husband is home and my Christmas tree was still in the box. In fact, it was in the box until last night when we finally got it out. And it just made me take a step back and look at the perspective of what it's like sometimes to be different, how we can so easily compare and feel like we are behind when someone else is moving at a pace that is different than what we are moving at, when we place expectations on ourselves because of what someone else has done. Those of you who are on my email list got an email last week talking about my $2,000 hot chocolate mishap, where I talked about detachment and letting go of expectations, because this is one area of my life where I struggle. I either make plans and get really upset and flustered when those things don't go out the way that they are supposed to in my mind. For example, last week was Tuesday. I was supposed to get a podcast episode out. That was my goal. I was loading up my computer. I was getting ready to put everything out there, to click the buttons, and I spilled hot chocolate all over my laptop. And I started praying. I started cleaning up the mess. You guys, the mess. Hot chocolate dripping everywhere. And this isn't even normal hot chocolate because I can't have dairy and I'm not supposed to have sugar. So this is like the pretend version of hot chocolate. And it is so dark and messy, and it dripped all over my papers on my desk, onto my lap, all over my blanket, onto my leather chair, onto the carpet. And of course, my immediate concern was the laptop, knowing that that was the most expensive thing in the room and that it was the most necessary for me to do my work. And grabbing it and trying to turn it off and grabbing towels, trying to wipe off the keyboard, and just seeing the sparks inside the keyboard because I could not get the laptop turned off. You guys, it's devastating if you've ever had this happen. And the thing is, it's not even about the laptop. It's about the fact that I had plans for how my day was going to go. And of course, I leave a little wiggle room in there. I know that these unexpected instances are going to come up. I'm going to be interrupted by kids or something's going to happen. It's inevitable in the world that we live in. Our plans are not God's plans, and they're not anyone else's plans either. So things are going to come up. But I was having such a hard time of the fact that I had a deadline and I wasn't going to meet it. That was the thing that bothered me more than all of the other things. And it's so silly. When we're on the outside of it, we can see it was an accident. It was a mistake. It's not the end of the world. But when you're in it, when you're living it, things feel so much bigger. Those tiny little pebbles feel like boulders. And that's what we're going to dig into today, is just this expectation, and how do we patiently wait when we have big expectations for ourselves, for the people around us, for the world around us. Advent is the culmination of 3 comings of Christ. So I find this fascinating, and I don't think this is something that is talked about enough. We know that Advent is about waiting for the birth of Jesus. It's about preparing our hearts to be open to receive him. But it's really, like I said, the culmination of the 3 comings of Christ. His historical coming 2,000 years ago, his birth, his present coming here and now in our lives, and his future coming at the end of history. This is an exciting time. Advent is sometimes called a mini Lent. And yes, we can do a little bit of penance and those types of things, and we should treat it as something special because it is something special. This Advent is never going to come again, and we're at the end of it. So if it hasn't been what you've expected, I just want to remind you that it's okay. I started the St. Andrew novena and I failed at it. I started another novena and I failed at it. My Advent has not been the most quote unquote successful Advent. I have been struggling even in my own prayer routines, but the Lord meets us where we are. Now, that doesn't mean that we stop trying to go seek him. It doesn't mean that we stop pursuing him and just wait for him to come find us wherever we're lying in our misery. No, we have to put in the work. But also he understands in our humanness, and he meets us in our humanness, and he wants to meet us in our humanness. So if it's felt like a failed Advent, just remember that this one won't come again. So take the opportunity to receive the graces that are here, because the graces that God invites you to right now will never come again. And those are opportunities that we don't want to miss out on. The beauty of the liturgical year is that during each season, we are invited to a fresh start. And Advent is the Catholic New Year. It's the new year of the liturgical season. Now, my brain still has not fully comprehended that because I am not very good at looking ahead. I am very much in the day-to-day and striving to be present in the day-to-day. Because again, when I look too far ahead and I get excited and I have expectations, then those aren't met and my world comes crashing down. So this is a place where I am growing. But I don't want to miss the opportunity that we are invited to come to know Christ more fully in this time. And this is a great time of year to reflect and to get excited about what is to come. Not just the coming of Christ, but how Christ is calling us to come to him in this season and in this new year. What I love is Father John Bertunek wrote a section in an Advent ebook that was put out by spiritualdirection.com. And he says, all we have to foster this spiritual growth is live each liturgical season with the attention of our heart on the primary aspect of God's revelation that the season highlights. Again, this Advent, we are different than any other Advent because we have been through different things this year. Some of us have lost loved ones. Some of us have changed jobs. Some of us have struggled with the changes that we've seen in our children or our spouses, or maybe in the world around us. Maybe we feel broken and disconnected or disheartened at the things going on in our church. This is an opportunity to look to Christ and to not lose focus of the meaning of Advent, the opening of our hearts. Don't get distracted. We know that the devil is always trying to bring down the church, to pull apart families, to take us from anything that is going to lead us closer to Christ. So how do we combat that? We look at Christ and we spend time with him. So how do we do this? How do we remain patient for the next consolation? How do we remain patient when things are crazy, when our laptops are frying before our eyes, when things aren't going the way we expected, when we're anxious because we haven't gotten any of the gifts on our list and Christmas is just a few days away? Maybe we have children who are expecting certain things and we aren't able to afford to give them those things. Maybe we have people in our lives who we really want to give something special and we're not able to. Maybe our loved ones are living across the country. How can we be patient? How can we embrace being different than what we see in those around us? So for this, I'm going to start off by going to Elizabeth first. Today, as this episode is coming out, is December 19th, and the gospel for today comes from the first chapter of Luke, chapters 5 through 25, and it is talking about Elizabeth and Zechariah. And as you guys know, Elizabeth was barren. She was older in age, and she was living a good life. We actually know this. Her and Zechariah, they were prime examples of the way that we should live for the Lord. And yet this prayer had not been heard. You probably know a mother who has been praying for a child and that child has not come yet. Or they've lost a child. And it is a struggle that goes so very, very deep. And we look at Elizabeth and we see her patience. We also see her suffering. Because at the time when she lived, it was considered a curse for the Jews to be without children. She was a stigma. She was the person who didn't have the perfect ornate Christmas tree and all of the presents wrapped and ready to go. Her life looked different than what the expectations were for her and her husband. Was God not listening? Did he not care about her struggles and her anxieties and her frustrations? Of course not. In fact, the angel Gabriel says to Zechariah that his prayer has been heard. God's plan has been unfolding. God doesn't ask us to ignore our suffering or our pain, but he asks us to trust him with faith, to bring our needs and concerns to him, to be confident that our prayers are heard, and then surrender the outcome to him, whatever it may be. Because, again, we know this. We know his plan is always better than our plan, but it's hard and it is difficult. And this is where we can really lean on these incredible women like Elizabeth, or maybe your favorite saint. And to just recognize the glory and all of the good that came. But first, there was waiting. There was much waiting from Elizabeth, from Zechariah. So that's the first person I would encourage you to kind of sit and maybe ask for her intercession as you are waiting for something, or as it feels like your prayers maybe aren't being answered this Advent season, or maybe as you reflect on this past year, all of the things that have not happened. And then also take a moment to really celebrate the beauty and the good of the prayers that have been heard. This is where I love my journal. I absolutely love going back even 10 years or so when I only wrote maybe a handful of times a year and looking at the things that I wrote that seem so ridiculous now, but how God has answered those in the most astronomical ways. Think about how many of your prayers have been answered this year. And trust that whatever it is that you're going through right now, whatever it is that you're waiting for, that the Lord is bringing beautiful and wonderful and good things to you. So again, the first person I would look to is Elizabeth, and just the way that she lived her life, the way that her prayers were heard, even though it seems like maybe for a while God wasn't there. But she was persistent. She did not turn from God. She stayed with him. So ask the Lord right now to help you to recognize his hand in the sufferings and the hardships that are in your life right now. Ask him for greater trust and surrender to boldly pursue him, even in the waiting. So immediately following this, if we were to continue reading in the Gospel of Luke, we would see that the angel Gabriel then comes to Mary. And this story we know quite well. We know that the angel comes, he says, the child will be holy and will be called the Son of God. And he continues and says, know this too, your kinswoman Elizabeth has in her old age herself conceived a son, and she whom people call barren is now in her 6th month, for nothing is impossible to God. Nothing is impossible to God. So no matter how long you've been waiting, if you have taken it to prayer and God tells you to continue to wait, then it's our responsibility to continue to wait. We can look to Mary for, again, the qualities of patience and surrender and trust, because her whole life is patience and surrender and trust. And when the angel Gabriel comes to her, this is just the beginning of this journey, this incredible surrender. So I think this is a really great time if we're looking back at the tree example, my tree still being in the box and comparing it to everybody else. Am I trusting in God's plan, or am I surrendering my power and my joy to my own plans, my expectations for what my home should look like? And honestly, I'm so grateful to my mother for all the times that she didn't have it all together. I remember there was a year where we put up our tree on Christmas Eve. It was like, we don't have anywhere to put the presents. We have to put up our tree on Christmas Eve. And it was okay. My parents were both teachers, and anyone who is in the teacher world knows that leading up to Christmas is so busy and overwhelming and chaotic. I just talked to a teacher the other day, and he's in charge of Christmas concerts and things, and he had Christmas concerts and basketball games and all of these things in such a short span of time. And we're so hard on ourselves about what our homes look like, but look at all the good that he was doing in these other situations. And we have to remember that. And also, if we're looking at the liturgical year, we have all the time in the world to celebrate Christmas once we actually get to Christmas Day. We don't have to do all of the things beforehand, the Christmas cookies, the carols, all of those things, the Christmas cards. Don't get me wrong, I love getting Christmas cards, but I am absolutely terrible at getting them sent out. I think since I have been married, we have sent out Christmas cards one time. And it's not because I don't have good intent. I buy Christmas cards all of the time. getting them sent out, it's my brain just doesn't always have the space or capacity for it. And so I have to prioritize. And you know what? I give myself grace. It is okay. So if you never get a Christmas card from me and you know me personally, don't think that you're just not on my Christmas list. I just didn't send out any cards. I'm that person who writes thank yous and cards and puts them in the envelopes and sometimes even gets a stamp on them and they never make it to the mailbox. And then I find them 2 years later and debate, should I send this now or not send it? I have to open it because I don't even know when it was from. And that's just me. And I'm at the point in my life where I have the freedom to just say people can love me as me or they cannot, and that's okay. Because their perception of me is not necessarily my problem. They get to decide what they want to think about me, and that's okay. Because I know my intent. My intents are good. And of course, I will try to do better. But there's only so much capacity in my brain. I'm only able to do so many things. And that's not always my number one priority. But again, go back to this question. Ask yourself, am I trusting God's plan or am I surrendering my power and my joy to my own plans, to someone else's expectations? Another really great question I think that we can ask when we are struggling to be patient, because again, Advent's all about patience. How am I utilizing my prayer life to help me grow in patience? Are you asking God for exactly what you need during this time? And I also just want to I think I'm going to do a whole nother episode on this, but if you're going to prayer, I've seen a lot of people lately asking about dryness in prayer or being distracted, because I know those of you listening to this, your brains are always going a million miles an hour, and it can be really hard to just sit in the quiet and listen. It's really important to take time to get recollected before you start praying. So if you're like, man, I have 20 minutes to pray, and I come in and I sit down and I just automatically think that I should be able to hear God, and why can't I hear him? And my brain is going all over. It's important to take time to slow down first. That's why I love praying in the morning, because I don't have quite so many distractions on my mind, unless I've gone to bed with a lot of distractions because I didn't finish things and I'm anxious. But that time right away in the morning before you've looked at your phone, before you have filled your brain with the to-do list, is a really great time to pray, and being consistent is super, super helpful. But allow yourself some time to get recollected. So if it's been a really busy day and you're trying to pray in the evening, maybe listen to some soothing, calming music for 10 minutes before you start your prayer. Yes, we can utilize that as part of our prayer, but we really want to get to the point where we can start to sit in the quiet. And it takes practice to really cultivate that muscle. And especially for brains that go, and have all the tabs open and don't know how to rest, just taking a little time to slow down and let yourself settle and be distracted for a minute if you need to be. Write down all the things that are in your brain. Do a quick 5-minute brain dump to get all of those things out, so that then you can sit and be with God and will be more open to listening. Okay, like I said, that's a whole nother podcast. But another question you can ask here is, if I am asking God for exactly what I need and I'm not seeing the fruits of that prayer, what might God be offering me instead? Another thing we can do is offer up ourselves our anxiousness or worry that comes with the waiting and the patience, and ask ourselves, who might be saved because of it? Or how might my penance be for the healing of another or for myself even? And really invite God into your suffering. If you are high choleric or melancholic, you probably want to just do it yourself. You may not want to invite the Lord in. It's like God's already done enough and we're self-reliant and we like to just white knuckle and power through. But God wants to be part of all of our lives, every single bit of it. He wants to be part of our suffering as well as our joy and our hope and our happiness. And if he didn't, he wouldn't have sent Jesus. So invite God into your suffering and embrace that. And the last thing I want to leave you with here, I was working with a client the other day and we talked about really leaning into our strengths and ideal conditions. It was kind of funny because this happens often in calls. And I know this is true from when I've gotten coached myself. You go into a call and you're like, okay, I think this is really what I need to work on. This is what my problem is. This is where I'm really struggling. And by the end of the call, you're in a completely different direction because what we think our problem is and what the actual problem is are almost always completely different. We might come in thinking that our anxiety and our worry and all of our frustrations are coming from our children, and really it has nothing to do with our children. It has to do with the fact that we aren't living in our ideal conditions ever. So, for example, a melancholic really needs time to think, to pray, to process emotions. They are very deep thinkers. They don't always ask for this time and space. And so if they are constantly surrounded by stimulation, by noise and lots of people, they aren't having time to cultivate that introverted self-reflection. Then it isn't even about the other circumstances or the particular situation that's maybe setting them off. It's about the fact that they haven't had time to just be alone. And maybe they can find time to be alone and maybe they can't. And so then we really lean on some of the other strengths. Like maybe just go have a good cry. If that is something that makes you feel better, go lock yourself in the bathroom, take your 5 minutes and cry in the shower. And sometimes that alone is going to make us feel better. And also recognizing that it is not selfish to need time to yourself. When Jesus was in the crowds, when he was performing the miracles, he always ended up going off alone to pray, because that is where we are refilled. It is when we are alone with God. And yes, he can refill us in all the chaos. He can, and he does. But if we really want to be filled, we need to make sure that we are taking time to sit with him alone in the quiet, where we can listen. Okay, so I just want to recap this really quick. Patiently waiting in Advent. Ways that we can open our hearts, open our minds to the fruits that are to come. If we look at Elizabeth, we are reminded that our prayers are heard. Our life does not have to look like someone else's. And in fact, if it doesn't, that might be a beautiful grace. We are not behind. We are perfectly on time for us. I'm going to say that again. We are not behind. We are perfectly on time for us. And what is on time for us is a different timeline than everyone else around us. We can look at Mary and we can remember the words that the angel Gabriel said to her, nothing is impossible with God. We can look at her qualities of patience and surrender and trust that is going to continue once the child Jesus is birthed. It is unending patience and surrender and trust from Mary. We can look at, are we trusting in God's plan? Are we relying on ourselves? Are we asking God for exactly what we need? Are we considering what else he might be offering us when we don't hear a response? And are we taking the opportunity to offer up our anxiousness, our worry, our waiting, and looking at who might be healed because of it? Every second of every day is an opportunity for us to grow closer to the Lord or further from him. So I just want to encourage you as you head into this very Merry Christmas to keep your eyes on Christ and to really open up yourselves to the opportunities that he is presenting, to love, to be present to the moment that is in front of you. So Whether your tree is still in the box, the gifts are not wrapped, or maybe you're dreading the upcoming encounter with a relative, remember that Christ is in all of it. You are exactly where you are supposed to be, and you have a choice for how you want to show up in those moments. Also, your mind sometimes just keeps going and you can't turn it off. So you'll be listening to the person in front of you who's talking, but you actually have no idea what they just said because your mind was thinking about the project that you wanted to be working on or all of the things that you haven't gotten done. So I help women who struggle with that to create space from all of their obligations and desires so that they're actually able to be present with their loved ones. Imagine being able to press pause on some of those tabs in your brain to really dive into conversation and create better relationships with your loved ones. Or better yet, to have an intimate relationship with God instead of just knowing about Him. To be able to sit and pray and hear the Lord's voice instead of all of your own thoughts racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So anyway, consult calls are always free. So get signed up before the new year and I get booked out. The link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next. Beautiful souls, thank you again for journeying with me. If you have been blessed by this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a review. Be sure to screenshot it, share it on your social media stories, and don't forget to tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Kylie M. Hine. Stay persistent in prayer, protect your peace, and as always, share the light of Christ with everyone around you.